HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Arrival from the Grave, The Complete Tales of Jules de Grandin, Volume 4, by Seabury Quinn. Read by Paul Woodson. Introduction, by George A. Vanderberg and Robert E. Weinberg. Weird Tales, the self-described unique magazine, and one of the most influential Golden Age pulp magazines in the first half of the 20th century, was home to a number of now well-recognized names, including Robert Bloch, August Derleth, Robert E. Howard, H.P. Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith, and Manly Wade Wellman. But among such stiff competition was another writer, more popular at the time than all of the aforementioned authors, and paid at a higher rate because of it. Over the course of 92 stories and a serialized novel, his most endearing character captivated pulp magazine readers for nearly 3 decades, during which time he received more front-cover illustrations accompanying his stories than any of his fellow contributors. The writer's name was Seabury Quinn, and his character was the French occult detective Jules de Grandin. Perhaps you've never heard of de Grandin, his indefatigable assistant, Dr. Trowbridge, or the fictional town of Harrisonville, New Jersey. Perhaps you've never even heard of Seabury Quinn, or maybe only in passing, as a historical footnote in one of the many essays and reprinted collections of Quinn's now more revered contemporaries. Certainly de Grandin was not the first occult detective. Algernon Blackwood's John Silence, Hodgson's Thomas Carnacki, and Sax Rohmer's Maurice Claw preceded him, nor was he the last, as Wellman's John Thunstone, Marjorie Lawrence's Miles Pennoyer, and Joseph Payne Brennan's Lucius Leffing all either overlapped with the end of de Grandin's run or followed him. And without doubt de Grandin shares more than a passing resemblance to both Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, especially with his Dr. Watson-like sidekick, and Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot. Indeed, even if you were to seek out a de Grandin story, your options over the years would have been limited. Unlike Lovecraft, Smith, Wellman, Bloch, and other Weird Tales contributors, the publication history of the Jules de Grandin tales is spotty at best. In 1966, Arkham House printed roughly 2,000 copies of The Phantom Fighter, a selection of 10 early works. In the late 1970s, Popular Library published 6 paperback volumes of approximately 35 assorted tales, but they are now long out of print. In 2001, the specialty press, the battered Silicon Dispatch Box, released an oversized 3-volume hardcover set of every de Grandin story, the first time all the stories had been collected. And, while still in production, the set is unavailable to the general trade. So, given how obscure Quinn and his character might seem today, it's justifiably hard to understand how popular these stories originally were, or how frequently new ones were written. But let the numbers tell the tale. From October 1925, when the very first de Grandin story was released, to December 1933, a roughly 8-year span, de Grandin's stories appeared in an incredible 62 of the 96 issues that Weird Tales published, totaling well over 750,000 words. Letter after letter to the magazine's editor demanded further adventures from the supernatural detective. If Quinn loomed large in the mind of pulp readers during the magazine's heyday, then why has his name fallen on deaf ears since? Aside from the relative unavailability of his work, the truth is that Quinn has been successfully marginalized over the years by many critics, who have often dismissed him as simply a hack writer. The de Grandin stories are routinely criticized as being of little worth, and dismissed as unimportant to the development of weird fiction. A common argument, propped up by suspiciously circular reasoning, concludes that Quinn was not the most popular writer for Weird Tales, just the most prolific. These critics seemed troubled that the same audience who read and appreciated the work of Lovecraft, Smith, and Howard could also enjoy the exploits of the French Ghostbuster. And while it would be far from the truth to suggest that the literary merits of the de Grandin stories exceed those of some of his contemporaries' tales, Quinn was a much more skillful writer, and the adventures of his occult detective more enjoyable to read than most critics are willing to acknowledge. In the second half of the 20th century, as the literary value of some pulp fiction writers began to be reconsidered, Quinn proved to be the perfect whipping boy for early advocates attempting to destigmatize weird fiction. He was the hack author who churned out formulaic prose for a quick paycheck. Anticipating charges that a literary reassessment of Lovecraft would require reevaluating the entire genre along with him, an arbitrary line was quickly drawn in the sand, and as the standard-bearer of pulp fiction's popularity, the creator of Jules de Grandin found himself on the wrong side of that line. First and foremost, it must be understood that Quinn wrote to make money, and he was far from the archetypal starving artist. At the same time that his Jules de Grandin stories were running in Weird Tales, he had a similar series of detective stories publishing in Real Detective Tales. Quinn was writing two continuing series at once throughout the 1920s, composing approximately 25,000 words a month on a manual typewriter. Maintaining originality under such a grueling schedule would be difficult for any author, and even though the de Grandin stories follow a recognizable formula, Quinn still managed to produce one striking story after another. It should also be noted that the tendency to recycle plots and ideas for different markets was very similar to the writing practices of Weird Tales' other prolific and popular writer, Robert E. Howard, who is often excused for these habits rather than criticized for them. Throughout his many adventures, the distinctive French detective changed little. His penchant for amusingly French exclamations was a constant through all 93 works, as was his taste for cigars and brandy after, and sometimes before, a hard day's work, and his crime-solving styles and methods remained remarkably consistent. From time to time, some new skill or bit of knowledge was revealed to the reader, but in most other respects the Jules de Grandin of The Horror on the Links was the same as the hero of the last story in the series, published 25 years later. He was a perfect example of the rare French blonde type, rather under medium height, but with a military erectness of carriage that made him look several inches taller than he really was. His light blue eyes were small and exceedingly deep-set, and would have been humorous had it not been for the curiously cold directness of their gaze. With his wide mouth, light mustache waxed at the ends in two perfectly horizontal points, and those twinkling, stock-taking eyes, he reminded me of an alert tomcat. Thus is de Grandin described by Dr. Trowbridge in the duo's first meeting in 1925. His personal history is dribbled throughout the series. De Grandin was born and raised in France, attended medical school, became a prominent surgeon, and in the Great War served first as a medical officer, then as a member of the intelligence service. After the war, he traveled the world in the service of French intelligence. His age is never given, but it's generally assumed that the occult detective is in his early 40s. Samuel Trowbridge, on the other hand, is a typical conservative small-town doctor of the first half of the 20th century. As described by Quinn, he is a cross between an honest brother of George Bernard Shaw and former Chief Justice of the United States Charles Evans Hughes. Bald and bewhiskered, most, if not all, of his life was spent in the same town. Trowbridge is old-fashioned and somewhat conservative, a member of the Knights Templar, a vestryman in the Episcopal Church, and a staunch Republican. While the two men are dissimilar in many ways, they are also very much alike. Both are fine doctors and surgeons. Trowbridge might complain from time to time about de Grandin's wild adventures, but he always goes along with them. There is no thought ever of leaving de Grandin to fight his battles alone. More than any other trait, though, they are two men with one mission, and perhaps for that reason they remained friends for all of their 93 adventures and countless trials. The majority of Quinn's de Grandin stories take place in or near Harrisonville, New Jersey, a fictional community that rivals, with its fiends, hauntings, ghouls, werewolves, vampires, voodoo, witchcraft, and zombies, Lovecraft's own Arkham, Massachusetts. For more recent examples of a supernatural-infested community, one need look no further than the modern version of pulp fiction narratives, television. Buffy the Vampire Slayer's Sunnydale, California, and The Night Strangler's Seattle both reflect the structural needs of this type of supernatural narrative. Early in the series, de Grandin is presented as Trowbridge's temporary house guest, having traveled to the United States to study both medicine and modern police techniques. But Quinn quickly realized that the series was due for a long run, and recognized that too much globe-trotting would make the stories unwieldy. A familiar setting would be needed to keep the main focus of each tale on the events themselves. Harrisonville, a medium-sized town outside New York City, was completely imaginary, but served that purpose. Most of the de Grandin stories feature beautiful girls in peril. Quinn discovered early on that Farnsworth Wright, Weird Tales' editor from 1924 to 1940, believed nude women on the cover sold more copies. So, when writing, he was careful to always feature a scene that could translate to appropriately salacious artwork. Quinn also realized that his readers wanted adventures with love and romance as central themes, so even his most frightening tales were given happy endings, of a sort. And yet, the de Grandin adventures are set apart from the stories they were published alongside by their often explicit and bloody content. Quinn predated the work of Clive Barker and the splatterpunk writers by approximately 50 years. But using his medical background, he wrote some truly terrifying horror stories. Tales like The House of Horror and The House Where Time Stood Still feature some of the most hideous descriptions of mutilated humans ever set down on paper. The victims of the Mad Doctor in the House of Horror, in particular, must rank near the top of the list of medical monstrosities in fiction. Another element that set Quinn's occult detective apart from others was his pioneering use of modern science in the fight against ancient superstitions. De Grandin fought vampires, werewolves, and even mummies in his many adventures, but oftentimes relied on the latest technology to save the day. The Frenchman put it best in a conversation with Dr. Trowbridge at the end of The Blood Flower. "And wasn't there some old legend to the effect that a werewolf could only be killed with a silver bullet?" "Ah, bah!" he replied with a laugh. "What did those old legend-mongers know of the power of modern firearms? When I did shoot that wolfman, my friend, I had something more powerful than superstition in my hand. Morbleu, but I did shoot a hole in him large enough for him to have walked through." Quinn didn't completely abandon the use of holy water, ancient relics, and magical charms to defeat supernatural entities, but he made it clear that de Grandin understood that there was a place for modern technology as well as old folklore when it came to fighting monsters. Nor was de Grandin himself above using violence to fight his enemies. Oftentimes the French occult investigator served as judge, jury, and executioner when dealing with madmen, deranged doctors, and evil masterminds. There was little mercy in his stories for those who used dark forces. While sex was heavily insinuated, but rarely covered explicitly in the pulps, except in the most general of terms, Quinn again was willing to go where few other writers would dare. Sexual slavery, lesbianism, and even incest played roles in his writing over the years, challenging the moral values of the day. In the end, there's no denying that the de Grandin stories are pulp fiction. Many characters are little more than assorted clichés bundled together. De Grandin is a model hero, a French expert on the occult, and never at a loss when battling the most evil of monsters. Dr. Trowbridge remains the steadfast companion, much in the Dr. Watson tradition, always doubting but inevitably following his friend's advice. Quinn wrote for the masses, and he didn't spend pages describing landscapes when there was always more action unfolding. The Jules de Grandin stories were written as serial entertainment, with the legitimate expectation that they would not be read back to back. While all of the adventures are good fun, the best way to properly enjoy them is over an extended period of time. Plowing through one story after another will lessen their impact and greatly cut down on the excitement and fun of reading them. One story a week, which would stretch out this entire 5-volume series over 2 years, might be the perfect amount of time needed to fully enjoy these tales of the occult and the macabre. They might not be great literature, but they don't pretend to be. They're pulp adventures, and even after 75 years, the stories read well. Additionally, though the specific aesthetic values of Weird Tales readers were vastly different than those of today's readers, one can clearly see the continuing allure of these types of supernatural adventures, and the long shadow that they cast over 20th and early 21st century popular culture. Sure, these stories are formulaic, but it is a recipe that continues to be popular to this day. The formula of the occult detective, the protector who stands between us and the monsters of the night, can be seen time and time again in the urban fantasy and paranormal romance categories of commercial fiction, and is prevalent in today's television and movies. Given the ubiquity and contemporary popularity of this type of narrative, it's actually not at all surprising that Seabury Quinn was the most popular contributor to Weird Tales. We are proud to present the first of 5 volumes reprinting every Jules de Grandin story written by Seabury Quinn. Organized chronologically, as they originally appeared in Weird Tales magazine, this is the first time that the collected de Grandin stories have been made available in trade editions. Finally, if Seabury Quinn is watching from above and closely scrutinizing the shelves of bookstores, he would undoubtedly be pleased as punch, and proud as all get-out, to find his creation, Dr. Jules de Grandin, rising once again around the world, battling the forces of darkness, wherever, whoever, or whatever the nature of their evil might be. When the jaws of darkness open, only Jules de Grandin stands in Satan's way. Robert E. Weinberg, Chicago, Illinois, USA, and George A. Vanderberg, Lake Eugenia, Ontario, Canada. 23rd of September, 2016. Keeping the Golden Age Alive by Mike Ashley. Even though the final Jules de Grandin story appeared over 60 years ago, the series remains the longest-running occult detective series, 93 stories in total, including 1 complete novel and several of novella length. Curiously, however, when the subject of occult or psychic detectives arises in discussion, it's unlikely that Seabury Quinn's Jules de Grandin will be the first to be mentioned. He might not even enter the discussion at all, despite the fact that the series remains the longest-running of all occult detective series, with 93 stories in total, including 1 complete novel and several of novella length, all of which appeared over 60 years ago. Instead, one will think immediately of Algernon Blackwood's John Silence, or William Hope Hodgson's Carnacki, or Joseph Payne Brennan's Lucius Leffing, or, of course, more recent TV examples, such as Kolchak in The Night Stalker, or Mulder and Scully in The X-Files. But the occult detective has a long history and a rich tradition, and what is frequently overlooked is the pivotal role that Quinn's de Grandin stories played in developing and even rescuing the character from premature decay. They poured life and vitality into a character role that was becoming dangerously stereotyped, and perhaps more importantly, too closely tied to the British establishment. Indeed, it was Quinn who popularized the psychic sleuth in the United States and gave the archetype a whole new lease on life. As Jules de Grandin's adventures spanned those years between the decline of the traditional British supernatural sleuths at the end of the 1920s and their reemergence in the 1960s. The occult detective in Britain has its roots in the medical profession, an approach which has proved ideal for many other detectives or their companions. Samuel Warren's long-running series, Passages from the Diary of a Late Physician, which began in Blackwood's magazine in August 1830, has the nameless first-person narrator investigating all manner of maladies, especially nervous disorders. Many of the stories are macabre, and a few verge on the supernatural, such as The Spectre Smitten, February 1831, in which a patient's madness has arisen out of his apparently seeing the ghost of a recently deceased neighbor. The series proved very popular, not least because Warren's identity was also kept anonymous, and many readers believed these were genuine cases. Even before Warren's series began, the German writer E.T.A. Hoffmann had included an investigative doctor in Das öde Haus, The Deserted House, in the second volume of Nachtstücke in 1817. But as this story was not translated into English until 1855, it did not have the impact of Warren's series, which had helped establish the physician as a natural investigator of strange happenings, whether genuine hauntings or delusions. Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu introduced the German physician Dr. Martin Hesselius in Green Tea, serialized in All the Year Round, 23rd of October to 13th of November 1869, whose investigations were recorded by his anonymous medical secretary. As with Warren's stories, Green Tea considers the extent to which hauntings might be psychosomatic. Although Hesselius does not appear in any of Le Fanu's other stories, his casebook was used as a framing device when Le Fanu collected some of his best weird tales as In a Glass Darkly, 1872. When Grant Allen started his writing career, masquerading as J. Arbuthnot Wilson, he had two medical students undertake a scientific analysis of a ghost in Our Scientific Observations on a Ghost, Belgravia, July 1878. Allen was already parodying a genre which had barely got off the ground, but the story highlights the public's growing interest in a thorough investigation of ghosts and the occult. There had been a growth in curiosity about spiritualism and psychic phenomena since the 1850s, notably in the demonstrations given by the Scottish medium Daniel Douglas Home. This had led to the formation of various spiritualist bodies, such as the British National Association of Spiritualists in 1873, and through these developed the Society for Psychical Research, SPR, in 1881. The rigorous investigation of psychic phenomena had already been used to great effect by Edward Bulwer Lytton, who had witnessed some of Holmes' activities in one of the best mid-Victorian ghost stories, The Haunted and the Haunters, also in Blackwood's magazine, August 1859. With the formation of the SPR, though, scientific investigations of hauntings soon featured regularly in fiction. Arthur Conan Doyle, who was cautious early in his career but would later champion the cause of spiritualism, showed how the power of the mind might challenge science in his novella The Parasite, 1894, wherein the investigator, Professor Gilroy, almost succumbs to the mental strength of a formidable woman. Although Doyle also wrote other stories of occult investigation, such as The Brown Hand, The Strand, May 1899, which refers to the SPR, he introduced no recurring investigator, unlike his stories of Holmes and Watson, which had set a new template for detective fiction. One of the pleasures of encountering the occult detective is in pursuing his many and varied explorations, and it is the appearance of a regular character series that marks the emergence of the field as a distinct subgenre. One might point to Arthur Machen's Dyson as the first continuing character, as he appears in 4 stories, starting with The Inmost Light in The Great God Pan, 1894. But Dyson isn't an investigator by profession. He's a rather dissolute author with a side interest in the scientific understanding of the outre, and he gets dragged into investigations by his colleagues. Much the same applies to Arabella Keneally's Lord Seifert, who has a sort of sixth sense in detecting the unusual, but whose cases, related in Some Experiences of Lord Seifert, are only borderline supernatural at best. That series, 11 stories in all, ran in the Ludgate from June 1896 to April 1897, but only 7 were collected in Belinda's Bows in 1897. A better example of the first regular character occult detective is L.T. Mead and Robert Eustace's John Bell, the Ghost Exposer, whose adventures were serialized in Cassell's magazine starting in June 1896 and collected as A Master of Mysteries in 1897. A man of private means, Bell has devoted his life to exploring the weird and mysterious, and has become an exposer of ghosts. Although these stories are therefore non-supernatural, they are full of atmosphere and challenge the reader to see if they can understand the mundane solution. Bell, then, was an investigator in the true tradition of the SPR. These precursors lead at last to the first true, genuine example, the cases of Flaxman Lowe, a psychologist who, like Bell, has devoted his life to understanding psychic phenomena. When the first set of 6 stories, written by Hesketh Pritchard and his mother, Kate O'Brien Ryle Pritchard under the pseudonym E.&H. Heron, were published in Pearson's magazine from January to June 1898, they were presented under the heading Real Ghost Stories, with each story illustrated by a picture of a haunted house. Lowe also writes up his investigations for the SPR, giving the stories more than a veneer of verisimilitude. A second series ran in Pearson's the following year, and all 12 stories were collected in the landmark and now quite rare volume Ghosts, 1899. With Flaxman Lowe, the occult detective field was ready to blossom. The magazines saw there was a winning formula in feigning veracity, and repeated the guise with Alan Upward's The Ghost Hunters in the Royal Magazine in 1905, and Jessie Adelaide Middleton's True Ghost Stories in Pearson's in 1907. These ushered in a true golden age, which really began with John Silence, Physician Extraordinary, by Algernon Blackwood in 1908. With the Silence stories, the 2 threads of the occult detective come together. He's both a psychic investigator and a doctor, or physician extraordinary. Like John Bell and Flaxman Lowe, Silence has devoted years to studying, or perhaps experiencing would be the better word, since he hid himself away from the world for 5 years, the occult. But like Samuel Warren's investigator, Silence is also a genuine doctor, interested in psychic afflictions, though he has no consulting rooms. Blackwood's publisher, Everleigh Nash, gave John Silence huge publicity, which led to not only significant sales and the chance for Blackwood to become a full-time writer, but also sealed the reputation on the occult detective. The floodgates opened, and over the next 2 decades, almost every popular magazine featured a psychic sleuth. The Idler ran William Hope Hodgson's Carnacki, The Ghost Finder, in 1910, The new magazine featured...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?